In our next segment, we are going to talk with renowned urbanist Richard Florida about the future of cities. Back in a sec. We are now joined by urban economist Richard Florida. So many of our listeners will know him, but for those who don't, Richard is a University of Toronto professor and the author of many celebrated books on urban growth. He's also a Sidewalk Labs advisor. And given all that's happening in cities right now, we wanted him to join the Sidewalk Weekly to talk about what things might look like in the future. So Rich, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We talked a couple months ago at the very beginning of this pandemic, and you were pretty optimistic about the future of cities. I'm wondering, as we sit here a couple months later, cities are starting to open up. Do you still feel that same optimism?
Well, I'm more optimistic, not less. And I think the takes have gotten more dystopian. Everyone from New York with means has left. So that's the general take. And then there's usually a map, which shows that, in fact, a small percentage of New Yorkers left. That's the place there was really the only and biggest urban exodus in the United States. You know, I'm in Toronto. If there's been an exodus, it's been fractional, right? People didn't even go up to their cottages until the weather got warm, until late May. So I think that what the crisis is doing is accelerating a bunch of moves that were going to be made anyway. And we're reading into that, because what people do in crises is they get really scared really fast. They think the worst. And then for some reason, they're impelled to write that down as they're going to have a record of what they predicted. New York will die during 2001. New York will die during the financial crisis. New York will die during this, that, and the other thing. And of course, every time they're wrong. In general, I become more optimistic the longer this has gone on. But on the other side, there's all these utopian takes. You know, the cities are going to become magically green, magically healthy. There's going to be no cars. There's going to be no air pollution. There's going to be bike lanes. Everyone's going to look like Copenhagen. And the reality of this stuff is that the cities will look pretty much the way they did. And I think here will be the difference. They'll be slightly younger. For sure, they'll be slightly younger. They will have, in the near term, a lot less demand for office space and a lot less demand for street level retail. That'll be a challenge. There will be more bike lanes and less people using transit, but there'll also be a lot more people in cars, which is going to be a pain in the neck. But they're going to be something like we see today, with a few subtle changes. And then over the next couple of years, they'll come back completely. But no, I'm very optimistic about the future of cities.
So the end of density claims, though, overblown.
Density is one factor, but when I worry about density, I don't worry about density of cities. I worry about two things: fear of transit and fear of elevators. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm scared to go to New York City. It's, do I get in the train? Do I take transit? Do I get in an elevator? Managing transit and trains is going to be a big deal, and there are ways to do that. And then how do you manage, if you're in a big office tower or a big residential tower, the use of the elevator? Because I think those are the things the elements of density that would make a person fearful on a day-to-day basis.
It sounds like you feel like big coastal cities are going to come back. But I do think that there could be an opportunity for smaller cities to lure a lot of folks who are, facing the pressures of really high rent. So could you talk a little bit more about the opportunities for smaller cities right now?
So I think bigger cities will be ever more for the very young and the very ambitious and the super successful. But that the ability of families, or the fear of families of being in cities, that will increase. So you're going to see this, this barbell, which this is nothing new in the United States, where people come to the cities to build their careers, embark on their lives, take advantage of a thick labor market, develop personal networks and connections that move them through their career, to meet their partners and spouses and friends. And then they have kids and go, oh shit, it's really expensive here and I can't get a lot of space and it's tough to navigate. I've got to move. So I do think for smaller metros, there is an opportunity that they're part of a new choice set, not for career formation and the first move out of college, especially for highly ambitious, highly talented people, but for the family formation move. Yeah. I've been writing about this for 30 years. For the first time in my life, I'm hearing people, I'm checking out different metros. So yeah, I think for those places, there's an opportunity to attract talent. It's funny. I think most of those places have thrown money and incentives at companies, which is exactly the wrong approach for them. The right approach for them would be, hey, you can work remotely. You're priced out of these big metros. You can have a fantastic life here. That's what Tulsa's done, and I work a little bit with the Kaiser Family Foundation. They have developed a program called Tulsa Remote, which actually appeals to people on this basis. You can have an affordable house. We'll make you part of a community. You can have a cool workspace, great restaurants. They've really caught up on amenities. 20 years ago, if you went to New York or San Francisco or London, the amenity bundle was just really different at every level. It was just better. And I remember living in Pittsburgh when the first Starbucks opened and people went crazy. Now when you go to any one of these smaller cities, the independent coffee shops are better. There's this whole slew of great independent restaurants and food trucks. There's great little independently owned boutique hotels. Everything seems locally sourced and locally crafted. And you go, wow, I wish I could find this in the big city, because where everything is more of a chain. I do think there's a real opportunity for those smaller places to attract people in the family formation years, for sure.
So as we think about those big cities, though, and the challenges they might have toward being more inclusive, it's certainly a challenge that we think about a lot at Sidewalk Labs. You've thought about it a lot. It was the subject of your last book. How do we make more progress in terms of getting these really big cities to focus on and actually move the needle on affordability and inclusion?
What excites me about the Sidewalk Labs project is it's run by urbanists, not by technologists, right? It's people like Dan Doctoroff, who I knew way before he was involved at Sidewalk Labs. People like yourself and your colleagues who come from an urbanistic background and are saying we can use these technologies not in the traditional smart city way to just hang sensors on places, but to build livable, inclusive, and more affordable. And now I think, where the technology comes in, healthier and safer and more resilient cities. I think one of the things the crisis does for big cities is it does make them more affordable by default. Now, this won't be forever.
Right.
It happened a little bit in 2008, and then it recoiled because people streamed to cities. But I do think it creates some breathing room. I think a lot of pressure is going to be taken off the real estate market because people in the family formation years are going to move out. I think older people are going to move out because they're going to feel more vulnerable. I think office space, there's going to be a glut of office towers that might have to be converted to residential real estate. And I think there's going to be retail that's over capacity. We may have a lot of excess housing. And so one of the things I would hope is that our cities become more affordable for young people and then for artists and musicians and creatives. But I don't think that'll last forever. I think we've got maybe a 2-year window where cities are going to get a little breathing room. But I think that's affordable housing for kind of working middle class people. I think the bigger issue is going to be how do you provide, as we've seen with this pandemic, cities are not only home to the very wealthy, they're home to the very disadvantaged. And those were the people who were super hard hit by the pandemic in New York. And so hopefully it opens up public policymakers, mayors, leaders' eyes, stakeholders' eyes, business community eyes to say, this is a point of vulnerability, this horrific economic division. It's not just morally and economically unfair. It's from a healthcare perspective, a disaster for all of us. So we have to finally go about, as we recover, building more inclusive, more affordable, and more resilient communities. And by the way, that's not just on the housing supply end. That's on the demand end. That means getting people more incomes, especially those frontline workers, making sure they have more money in their hands to survive, to buy houses and participate, in the housing market.
You had said previously that the inclusion discussion was the hardest to jumpstart of any of the conversations you've ever had to try to have with cities. And so it sounds like you're saying now you think there might be a window to have that conversation in a more productive manner.
I think it is a hard conversation to have. I think that cities have jumped at the ability to attract big companies, sometimes grotesquely, like in the case of the Amazon HQ2, where they offered far too many incentives. I think that cities have jumped on, we're going to attract all these rich people from foreign countries and suburbs and build luxury towers. There's only a very limited market for that. And I'm not sure we've been cured of that. I hope we've been cured of that. But I still think cities have to realize that at their core, they're what Jane Jacobs called these collections of diverse bundles of peoples and diverse bundles of neighborhoods. And that's what makes them great.
Something we think about a lot at Sidewalk Labs is the role of urban innovations. How could urban innovations kind of help cities work towards the goals of inclusion, of sustainability? Are there any particular urban innovations that you find really promising? And how do you feel about the role of urban innovations?
I think what surprised me is the backlash out there amongst so many so-called urbanists and others that were very scared of urban innovation. And so all urban innovation is either a sensor that would track them or an invasion on their privacy, when that's not what urban innovation is about. It's about making a safer, a healthier, a more resilient, and maybe a more inclusive city, and doing that in a democratic way where you listen to and reflect all stakeholders. I think the areas that are poised for real advance quickly are online work, online education, and delivery will be three things that really stick around. So the Instacart-like services, and even better. I think urban information and analytics, especially with a healthcare, home automation, real estate management, commercial building management for health and safety with sensors and temperature checks and building safety grades, elevator management, that stuff's going to grow like gangbusters. I think that people are going to say, once they see the importance of these technologies in making their lives healthier and safer, boy, they're going to say, this can help me, and I'm not going to be as resistant to it. I actually think the space is more open now. Even though there'll be some trauma, there's going to be some disruption in the space. The space is more open now for urban innovation than it has been in the past 3 to 5 years.
Let's talk quickly about Toronto. You live there now, and you've lived and worked there for years, and you have followed our project on the Quayside Waterfront development closely. We have ended that project, of course. But what aspects of that effort do you hope can live on, either in Toronto itself or even kind of more broadly?
Well, I'm really sad, because I love Toronto and I want to see Toronto become an innovation leader. And to my mind, that project was a critical component of that. But stars don't always align. And I think that the point of fact is that Toronto's governance mechanisms weren't quite ready for a project like that. I think that's what it shows more than anything. Toronto does not have it has a federalism, but does not have the flexible federalism, multi-level cooperation, public-private sector collaboration that we're used to in the United States. And that's something that I wasn't quite aware of, and it surprised me. I still very much love Toronto. Toronto still can learn from the project and become a center of urban innovation. Moreover, I'm hoping that Sidewalk Labs learned a lot from the Toronto experience and can take this project to other places. And, maybe it's just not the best fit for a city like Toronto. Maybe it's a better fit for a city like Detroit or Pittsburgh. In Detroit, you have a lot of vacant space, desperately needs care and maintenance to be redeveloped. You have the University of Michigan moving into the center city with the new innovation center, ostensibly devoted to urban innovation. In a place like Pittsburgh, I'm just taking two that I know. My wife's family lives in Detroit. I lived in Pittsburgh for nearly 2 decades. You have Carnegie Mellon, one of the 3 top, and along with Stanford and MIT engineering anchors, a lot of space on the waterfront, and many others. And maybe it doesn't have to be one big project, Maybe it could be many smaller seeds of projects that are planted in different communities.
Okay, Rich, we have one last question for you, and then we were going to let you go. So what would you say to someone who's been, pretty shaken by this pandemic, especially with all the negative talk around density and the death of cities? What is the positive ray of sunshine that you would give them to make them feel like it's going to be okay, the future of cities is bright?
Oh, this too will pass. And it's already passing. I mean, the anxiety level I feel is completely different. Although I did run a temperature the other day and got freaked out. And, it was just a simple thing. And I took an antibiotic and went away. But I'll tell you, I got really scared.
Yeah.
Even though I say that. So look, I think we're going to be fine in another year. This time and next year, I think we're going to be out of, I hope. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we're going to be back to pretty close to normal, if not sooner. I'm looking. I have my laptop piled up on a stack of old versions of Rise of the Creative Class that I can't even give away anymore. And I'm thinking about, what did I get wrong? I underpredicted the velocity and ferocity of the urban revival. Completely blew it. Like, completely underpredicted. After 2008, wrote this whole essay for The Atlantic, completely underpredicted the mass, the power of the urban revival. What I worry about is that this doesn't stop it at all in the long run, that it comes back even stronger and we're ill prepared and we end up even more divided. One thing I would hope, I think of urban innovation as a broad multidisciplinary effort of technologists and engineers and urbanists, that we have a similar kind of effort, or maybe an overlapping effort in public health, where medical professionals and public health professionals and urbanists and economists combine forces for a broader definition of what public health is and how we manage this. That's what I think I would really look forward to in the future.
Thank you for joining us, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
It is now time for our final segment, our favorite segment, The Last Smile. This is the segment where we set aside the depressing news of the week and focus on something happy for a minute each. Eric, what made you happy? What made you smile this week?
Okay, so I'm back in action this week, and what had me smiling was the story in the Wall Street Journal by Conrad Putzier on the fact that Cleveland is now building the tallest mass timber building in the U.S.
Ooh, go Cleveland.
This is a really important step forward for a hugely promising technology. Cleveland is going to build a 9-story building. Very exciting. In fact, the only thing I was disappointed in was the name of the building, which is just called Intro for some reason.
Intro to a tall timber future, perhaps?
Intro. I mean, like, it was about as disappointing as my intro joke today. So to me, you've got this 9-story building. It's made out of wood. If you're a J.D. Salinger fan, it's just screaming for a name like The Carpenter or Raise High the Roof Beam. And I just feel like, Cleveland didn't quite hit it.
Maybe Intro is some sort of hometown reference that we're completely over our head.
The JD? I don't know. Just it's 9 stories, right? It's I don't know. It had everything except for the name. All right, what's got you smiling?
So I enjoyed this article by Stephen Levy in Wired called "This AI Maestro Wants to Serenade You," all about this composer and cellist named Philip Shepard. And Philip likes to take walks in the woods. And one day in 2016, he kind of had this a vision, I guess, of what if I went out into the woods and the music started to adapt to my environment, right? Like, what if the sun came out and then the violins would come out to accompany the sun? So with that beautiful vision, Philip is like, what could I make this a reality? He gets together with a guy named Tom Gruber, who was a big AI guy at Apple, and they created this company called LifeScore. And so the idea is that they start off with regular musicians composing little elements of music that can be combined or looped, and then the AI takes the input from the listener and kind of chooses which elements and how to shape them. It could essentially become this soundtrack that adjusts to your setting and your mood. But I just thought it would be such a cool way to not only interact with nature, but maybe interact with a city, right? Like, imagine each neighborhood kind of having a different soundtrack, and then you get this basically an audio accompaniment for the sidewalk ballet of each neighborhood,
That's true. And then you walk into Times Square and it goes,
oh, God. No, I think it's like, That's how I imagine Times Square.
All right, folks. Time is up. Thank you for joining us this week.
If you want to read the stories we discussed today and many more, then you should sign up for the Sidewalk Weekly newsletter. Do that at sidewalklabs.com.
We should note that the views expressed in the Sidewalk Weekly don't necessarily reflect Sidewalk's company position.
And if you think that we're missing a perspective, then let us know. Send us an email or a voice memo to podcast@sidewalklabs.com, and we might just talk about it in a future episode.
The Sidewalk Weekly is produced by Vanessa and me. Vanessa does the editing. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions, and our art is by the great Tim Cow. We'll see you next time.